Police officers of Reddit, what are some laws that you feel uncomfortable enforcing because you disagree with them? Cops in my town carry nickels and feed the meters instead of taking the time to write tickets. I'm not a cop, but my daddies. We recently had a whole discussion about mandatory arrest laws, where if two people get into an argument, where someone is hurt, and have a prior relationship, cousins, ex-boyfriend/girlfriend, the officer has to arrest someone. This stemmed from a long history of men beating their wives, the wives calling the police, and the men saying that everything is cool and smoothing it over with the police. These laws work great in domestic abuse situations, because cops would tend to side with the man, but not great in other situations. Where my dad disagrees is in these other situations. Say you and your boys are out downtown for a night of drinking and games. When you beat one of your friends in a game of darts, your friend gets upset that you beat him and starts yelling. You yell back, of course, and your friend hits you. The bartender calls the cops and gets you bread and water, and you and your friend sober up. By the time the cops get there, your friend and you have kissed and made up, and everything is good between you. However, because the two of you are friends, the police must arrest someone by law. With these laws, a little argument over darts turns into a night in jail and a criminal record. It gets worse. Because your friend and you have a prior relationship, this misdemeanor turns into felony aggravated assault, and you're now a convicted felon. Lots of college-age boys have had their lives ruined by these laws, and for this reason, my dad disagrees. Most town/city ordinances. Things like not being able to park on the street in front of your house between certain hours of the night. Fuck that. You want me to ticket some dad's car because he moved it out of the driveway so his 5-year-old son could bike around the driveway? Yeah, shit's not happening. Also, certain traffic violations in the middle of the night. You forgot to signal your merge when you're the only vehicle on a 2-lane road at 3 AM. God help us all. Recently expired DLs and plates. A neighboring city wrote a car whose plates expired 11 minutes prior. He said the person should have known it was about to expire and taken care of it ahead of time. Oh fuck right off. We have all had life interfere with things. There's a huge difference between letter of the law and spirit of the law. I would say I'm probably just a terrible cop, but my coffee mug says I'm the world's best policeman, so it's definitely not that. Not exactly a law, but it's the closest thing I have that's semi-relevant. I did a spell as deputy and had to work in the city jail. When working the jail, I would be put in charge of the holding cells where you would go while you wait to see a magistrate judge to get your bail set. You could be in these cells for up to 72 hours in sane cases. Anyway, the rules for this particular part of the jail were that you could not shower for 72 hours, and you got one meal every 8 hours while you were there. Meals were served at 6 AM, noon and 6 PM. If you shower up at 6:30 you were not getting fed until 6 AM for example. The food they would serve was always the same. Bologna sandwich, white bread, American cheese, 1 apple and 1 bag of pretzels. Nothing fancy or delicious, but it would keep you going until you were released or sent up to the normal jail cells. Anyway, I'd always order a dozen or so extra lunches to have on hand for anyone who showed up late or for the homeless who were arrested. I made sure they could shower much sooner than 72 hours and I would help anyone who needed it get in touch with the bondsman to get them out of jail. The way I saw it, I was saving taxpayer money getting them out of jail and they already had the food. That would have just led to wasting the taxpayer money. Plus no one wants to go to court reeking of booze. I have never arrested anyone for weed, nor would I unless forced to. I have never been faced with it, but as long as it isn't in everyone's face I would never charge for prostitution. I was working security for a low-income housing facility. The people that ran this facility had a little scam they did where they would turn off the fobs of tenants, so tenants couldn't open the front door. It was $35 to get the fob turned back on. There were 400 tenants at this complex. At any one time a quarter of the fobs might be turned off. I was working the front desk, and if a tenant had a turned off fob I wasn't supposed to let them. I would let them in anyway. I got fired. Before I was a police officer, I was put in a sort of catch-all position, police service officer. Duties included evidence custodian, animal control, court bailiff, code enforcement, and part-time police work. This was 2012 to 2013. Kansas had a rather wet season. For about a month and a half straight we had rain almost every day. No one had a chance to mow their grass. City manager saw it as a grand opportunity for me to start writing people tickets for their grass being too high. I told him I didn't feel comfortable doing that. When asked why, I told him I didn't think it was right for me to write people tickets for tall grass when there are city-owned properties all over the city that had grass just as tall. We went back and forth. He got my captain involved and threw a fit. Before he stomped out of captain's office he made the comment, "This is my city, you work for me, and what I say is law." Captain agreed he was an asshole, but ultimately said I should just write the tickets. So I went back to the evidence locker, what everyone called my office, because I was the only one who had access, and did some research. An hour later, I walked over to the city manager's office, which happened to be right across the street, and handed the city manager about 14 tickets. He asked what those were. I told him I was doing exactly what he told me to do. I was writing tickets for grass being too tall. The first 14 tickets were for the 14 city-owned properties that had grass over 12 inches high. He said those weren't his responsibility. I calmly reminded him of his previous comment about him owning the city, and he called the chief. He insisted I be fired for insubordination. A month later, I was promoted to full-time patrol officer. Edit. After responding to a few comments, I figured it would be easier to just add this to the end of the post. Yes, I'm currently an EHS specialist, and I'm no longer in law enforcement. This happened 7 or 8 years ago. I was eventually fired for reasons I won't get into. All I will say is I obviously wasn't going to be the type of police officer they wanted me to be, so they made an example out of me. I'm sure there are different ordinances around America regarding the maintenance of your grass. In my city, the ordinance says you can't have your grass over 12 inches. 30.5 centimeters. The tall grass attracts vermin and reptiles that people don't want in their yards. And with the property taxes we pay in our area, people don't want to have to worry about stuff like that. It's amazing how the facade of your neighbor's house can affect the property value of your property. My best bud, known him 20 years, and his entire family are cops. Dad, mom, sister, and 2 brothers, all cops. Anyways, I have dinner with them from time to time, and I recall one time his brother discussing having to go monitor a protest with all the other cops in their riot gear. I was fascinated that every person, cops, at the table had the same reaction of hating protests, for different reasons. One person said it was boring, and you have to stand all day. One person said it sucks when the people you're protecting start yelling at you. His mom, who was a dispatcher, said it diminishes responsibility because all the cops were tied up at the protest and that means less patrols elsewhere, etc. Bottom line is, found out cops hate protests. A friend of mine is a cop in Rhode Island. This is what he said: sadly DUIs, because in Rhode Island it's a huge process and time consuming hassle. Sometimes you just want to go home. I would ask them to call a friend or family member to pick them up. One time a dude argued with me, and I kept trying to convince him to get a ride. He's like, "I'm fine to drive." He got back in his car, so I had to bust him for a DUI, after trying to give him so many chances. In Canada you are allowed to pepper spray a minor for spitting in a public place. There is a bit of backstory, but that was the gist of the story. If you want the full version. I was living at college residence in small town X Canada. I wasn't doing very well. I was the youngest person there. I was drinking a lot and smoking pot. Still illegal back then. Right before this story I gave myself a massive concussion. I got depressed and tried to kill myself. They put me in a psychiatric unit, and I signed myself out after 3 days. Unfortunately it was winter, I didn't have a coat or wallet, so I had to hike across small town X back to campus. The person in charge of residence didn't want me there, so she called the cops to detain me. She was trying to find my psychiatrist too. Needless to say I was all sorts of fucked up by this point. I was belligerent and spit on the ground. Small town ex-cop decides this is a form of assault or something, and it's time to arrest me. I refuse. He forcibly tries to put handcuffs on me, with his partner jumping on me as well as big fat dean of students. They hit my leg with a nightstick, still have hairline fracture, and pepper sprayed me. So yes, first-hand experience that Canadian cops pepper sprayed a minor for spitting. A traumatized, suicidal, mentally unhinged me. I haven't been a cop for a while, but I had a very brief stint as a deputy sheriff a handful of years ago. I struggled a lot with situations in which addicts were criminalized. There was one man who I remember who had been out on parole, but got caught with drugs in his system. Because of the failed drug test he was getting sent back to jail, and unfortunately, I was the one who had to take him there. It crushed me. It was an older dude who clearly didn't mean to cause trouble and clearly didn't want to be in this situation. He needed treatment, not jail time. We also had a lot of people come through who were using synthetic drugs, like bath salts when nobody knew what they were, and Bath and Body Works took their bath salts off the shelves. It was frightening to see some of our frequent flyers come back to us more and more incoherent because of these drugs and the permanent damage they were causing. But the truly heartbreaking moment was when I was transporting a young black man who was in for marijuana possession, and he said, "The next time I'm just using that synthetic shit. Your tests can't see that in my system." I went full on mama bear and told him, basically begged him, not to mess with that stuff, and relayed some of the things that I had seen. I have no way of knowing if he ever listened to me, but I really hope he did. Ultimately, my experience in this job changed my intended career path. I had been planning on staying in law enforcement for a chunk of time and then going to law school. I even had judges ready to write recommendation letters and a solid LSAT practice test score. But to see so many stupid and morally debased laws being upheld simply because that was the precedent didn't sit well with me. So I left that job and became a documentary filmmaker instead. Much less lucrative, but a more immediate way to work for justice. Open liquor laws. You wanna have a beer while you float down the river? Have at her. Gonna throw that beer bottle over the side into the stream? Damn right I'm gonna write you up for littering. And then the open liquor ticket is a fuck you for being a selfish ass. Edit. As was pointed out, I should clarify. Floating downstream on an inflatable tube. Not drinking while operating a boat, that still gets you charges. Was an Air Force cop. Hated taking cell phones from people from the flight line. It was an arrest offense, and could lose ranks and stuff. Every single cop has their phone on them on the flight line. I guarantee it.